Hello, my friends. Welcome to the TouchNot channel. Well, August is McPherson month here on the TouchNot and on the Clan Hatton Association channels. And joining us today is the volunteer administrator for both the Clan McPherson and the Clan Hatton DNA study projects on what I call the Family Tree DNA Network, which is, you might see the acronym FTDNA. Bruce McPherson's family roots can be traced from Ontario and Canada, where he lives today, down through Pennsylvania in the U.S., to Scotland to its origins. And I'm sure Bruce could take us further back if we ask him, but thanks for joining us, Bruce.
Not a problem. Happy to be here.
Good. So you're the administrator for two groups, correct?
Yes, I'm the admin for the McPherson group, and then there's a whole group of us that are part of Hatton. Most of the clans that are part of the association are represented, so I'm kind of the token McPherson.
I see. Are the groups for pretty much all the 12 or not?
There's a fair number of us admins on that project, yes.
Okay.
Whereas McPherson, I've got there's two co-admins and then myself as the admin.
All right. What about participants?
Well, I'd have to look at our numbers, but hundreds.
Okay. Right. All right. So I'm trying to get a little bit of a feel for are lots of groups needed, or is one Hatton and all those groups kind of a redundant thing?
Uh,
Or
I think at this point, any and every group is needed. I
okay.
think there's overrepresentation from any one of the clans or underrepresentation. So I think anyone who might be interested should definitely pursue it.
Right. So what I guess what I'm getting at is you should join both. If you're say a McPhail, you should join McPhail and the Hatton groups, not saying, oh, I'm in one, that's good enough. That's not the same thing.
No, no, and
Okay.
they look slightly different, and we can kind of talk about some of those differences later
Okay.
on. But the definitely, if you're part of the one individual clan, joining the Hatton as well as the kind of parent clan is always good.
Okay then. All right. Why don't you go ahead and start in and see what you think you'd give us for an overview like we talked about, Bruce?
Sure. So, I mean, I thought maybe it would be important to just start off with some terminology and just some general information about DNA. I'll kind of preface by saying I hold no advanced degrees in genetics. I'm not a professional. I'm a volunteer. The only reason I really got into testing and to talking about DNA was all about my own research. So everything that I've learned is kind of stemming from that. So if I misspeak or if someone's watching that does hold an advanced degree, feel free to let me know what I did wrong. But
Sure.
essentially, DNA is the makeup of us all. So just at the very basics, it's our genetic coding that makes me, me, and you, and everyone else. We get our DNA from our parents, generally a 50-50 split. So when we're talking about genealogy and genetic DNA, that's where the strength lies, that everyone has inherited their DNA directly from their parents, and their parents have inherited their DNA from their parents, and so on and so forth. So, really, anyone can test. There's a few other terms that I'll kind of touch on that might be important as we talk about different types of testing. So, everyone, by and large, has basically two sex chromosomes. Females are born two X's, males are born XY.
Okay.
So why that's pertinent is when we start talking about the different types of tests that are on the market. There are certain tests that you simply can't do if you're a female, specifically the Y-DNA test, because you don't have a Y chromosome. That's a very common question about folks that have asked me whether they can test, whether they can't test, why they have to find a male relative.
Right.
It stems from the fact that a Y chromosome is needed to do a Y-DNA test. No Y chromosome, no result. So that's where the strength is. The difference, the Y chromosome is something that changes very, very slowly through the
Wow.
generations. So it's a very powerful tool to be able to look back very deep in time because the Y chromosome that you received or I received obviously came from your father or my father,
Yeah.
because that's the only person who could give it to us. And it looks almost identical throughout the generations. So my Y chromosome looks like my father's, my grandfather's, my great grandfather's, my great great grandfather's, and so on and so forth.
So very useful.
Very, very powerful tool.
Okay.
It mutates just a little bit over hundreds of years. So when you test as a male and do a Y-DNA test, you're really unlocking everyone, every father, every forefather, every father's father for generations and generations with a great deal of accuracy.
Hmm.
So it's a very, very powerful tool. It's very, very helpful, and it's a tool that, again, as a male, you have an advantage. The different types of tests that I thought maybe it would be also beneficial to kind of talk about, because there's lots of tests on the market,
Yeah.
and it's easy to kind of get muddled up with which one is which. So
Absolutely.
really, there's an autosomal test. Autosomal tests are very common. The most companies that are out there do autosomal DNA. That test covers all your branches. So it's not related to those sex chromosomes I just talked about, the YY
Okay.
or Y or XX. It's related to your whole genetic makeup. So anyone can do them. Anyone, female, male, any generation. What we always kind of suggest, though, is if you have a particular interest, trying to find your oldest ancestor to do that test, because as time goes on, essentially, you're breaking your DNA up a little bit in that, what you're inheriting from your parents is also from your grandparents and so on and so forth. So
Okay.
if you're looking at, say, your McPherson line or whatever line that is of interest to you, trying to find your oldest male or oldest ancestor, male or female, to do that test
Yeah.
works the best. Um, if you can't find that, kind of finding the next generation down and the oldest in that family branch. And again, anyone can do it. All the major companies are offering autosomal tests. There's also what's called an mtDNA test.
Oh, yes.
It's your X chromosome up your female line. So again, males or females can do it. The difficulty with mtDNA tests is that you can't tie it to a specific surname, because in general, females change their surnames every generation.
Right.
So
Okay.
so, my mother's 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 mother isn't one steady surname.
Yeah.
So it's very powerful in looking back far and looking at deep genealogy and looking at deep connections, but you can't use it in the same fashion that you can use a Y-DNA test when you're tracing one line.
And that's just a societal reason, Bruce. Not a scientific reason,
No,
societal reason.
yeah, it's just because in general that's what we do, right?
Right.
And
Huh.
because of that, you can't tie it to one person or
Right.
one surname.
Okay.
And that leads us to the Y-DNA testing. So they're basically offered through Family Tree DNA. Again, not an employee, so not saying you have to go there, but
Right.
basically it's the only company that currently does it, to my knowledge. Some of the other companies will offer you kind of a watered down version of what your broad group might be, but Family Tree DNA is the only one that really offers different levels of that test, all the way up to what's called a big Y, which is 700 markers. So that's a lot of markers.
Okay.
And again, we can kind of break down each of those tests as well. But
Sure.
that's the Y-DNA test. So the big powerful piece is that it goes back generations and generations and generations. The hardest part about Y-DNA, though, is you have to find a male unbroken person in the family that you're looking for. So I can test my McPherson gene, but I can't test any of my other genes, because all I've got is my Y-DNA chromosome from my father and his father and his father and his father. If I'm interested in, say, my great grandmother, I can't test that. I have to go to that branch of the family tree,
Okay.
find a male who might
Yeah.
do it, and talk to him about testing. So you kind
Okay.
of
Yeah.
have to go, it takes a lot more work because you have to find someone who's willing to test in
Sure.
all the branches that you're interested in. But the trade-off in that work is that why DNA test is extremely powerful, extremely useful, and really one that I can't recommend more as far as trying to really look at where you might fit into a broad clan, for instance.
Okay.
Um, so that's kind of an overview of all the major tests. There's a number of companies out there. Again, everyone's kind of likely familiar if you've kind of looked around or you're interested in genetic DNA or DNA testing at all.
Yeah.
Ancestry is obviously the big one. Everyone's heard of it. It's out there. It'll do autosomal testing. Um, it's got a massive pool of participants. I don't even know how many millions that they've got.
Oh, I'm
So
sure.
it's very powerful if you're looking to get a lot of connections. Dropping back to kind of the discussion around the test, though, autosomal DNA, as time goes on, you start dropping cousins because once you're past like a third cousin or a fourth cousin, you
Hmm.
don't share that much DNA. Your fifth cousin, your sixth cousin, your seventh cousin, your eighth. You don't share like you share very, very minute amounts of DNA with them. They're still your
Okay.
cousins, but really with that test, you can only go to about the fourth or fifth cousin range, and then you start dropping people because
Without any degree of well, reliability or something.
yeah, because and it's hit and miss. I mean, you might have a few fifth cousins who you share, a section of your DNA with, and you might have some fifth cousins that you share a very, very, very slim amount
Sure.
of your DNA. That is so much, so little rather that you might not even show up in your results.
Right. Just the
So,
same. Just the same as if we're looking on a chart on paper, right? We're
yeah,
going out. We're going way out far from the root, so we're going to have less and less in common on that way out.
exactly. And
Okay.
again, there's the old saying that most of us are cousins, really, if you go back far enough, and that's accurate. I mean, some of the broader groups, thousands, millions, of members,
Yeah.
but it's your, hundredth cousins, for instance, and that's not really significant in the greater scheme of things.
Okay.
So Ancestry offers that one, and again, that's the autosomal test. It's kind of neat. You get the ethnic breakdown, which is again, I'll just a word of caution around. A lot of people kind of put a lot of stock into that, and I'm this amount Scottish and this amount Irish.
Yes.
In my experience, and again, I'm just speaking from my own testing, these are generalizations. That's why one company, will give you something slightly different than
Hmm.
another one. They're generalizations. They're based upon their sample size and their sample group. That's why every year Ancestry brings out a new update. Your
Right. It's fluid. I
DNA,
was going to say it's very fluid.
yeah, your DNA didn't change. You aren't more
Right.
Scottish this year than you were last year, but their population and the people who have tested has grown. So then
Okay.
suddenly it looks like, well, maybe you are slightly higher in that particular genetic coding, or you have more consistency with someone of that background. But
Getcha.
again,
Okay.
it's fluid, and really those numbers should be looked at as generalizations. They shouldn't be, relied upon religiously as far as I'm this amount this and this amount that, in my opinion.
Sure.
Um, and again, all the different testing companies, if you go to a different one, you're going to get a slightly different number because they have
Okay.
a different pool of participants and a different number, and
Yep.
maybe just a slightly different way of even grouping it. And if you click on some of those regions, they're actually very broad. So they might say Scotland, you click on that. Well, it turns out it could be Scotland, it could be Ireland, it could even
Yeah.
be, Wales, because
Right.
really we're talking,
Pharaohs and everything. Yeah. Yep.
yeah, we're talking about Celtic DNA. We're not talking about Scotland
Sure. Okay.
often. And it gets like how it would be very hard to disseminate one
Mm.
Celtic DNA from the next Celtic DNA once you get far back, right? I mean,
Yep.
it's one big family. So there's Ancestry, there's 23andMe, which is out there as well. They do autosomal as well.
Yep.
They kind of got big into the health thing. So I think
Right.
that's kind of one of the main strengths of that if you're interested in those predeterminations and whether or
Yeah.
not you have, some sort of
Right.
idea that
Susceptibility to something
yeah,
or other.
yeah,
Yes.
they
Okay.
they got big into that,
Yep.
and likely have a much smaller. Well, I know they have a much smaller sample size than Ancestry.
Okay.
My Heritage is another one that's out there. Again, very similar to Ancestry, autosomal only. Um, Same stuff they give you. Living DNA is another one that's
Oh,
I think
yes.
more
Okay.
popular in Europe than maybe over here in North America.
Yeah.
And then Family Tree DNA have their own autosomal tests, as well
Mm.
as mtDNA, as well as Y-DNA.
Okay.
So again, lots of companies, lots of people doing it. Everyone doing it slightly different. Everyone just as good as the next, I think. But it depends what your interest it is, and it depends who you are. And again, going back to the first point, it depends whether you're male or female,
Yep.
and what you were kind of hoping to get out of your test.
Right.
You can also, what I've done is a lot of the companies offer platforms to transfer your results from one to the next, and usually it's free or low cost. So again, that's specific to autosomal, and you can bring, say, for instance, your ancestry results over to FTDNA, and it's still no cost, I believe. I think the same is true of My Heritage. I think 23andMe, there was the issue with the data breach, and for a while they weren't accepting those, but I think
Oh,
they're back to accepting them now. So you can
okay.
bring your results from one platform to the other, and you're
Hmm.
not kind of stuck at, once you've done it at one site, then you can't do it at others. But I'd also say that, one DNA test in some cases likely isn't enough, depending on what your goals are again. So a Y-DNA test isn't the same as an autosomal test. They work
Right.
well hand in hand, but if you've done one, it's worth going and doing the other one, in my opinion. Because again, it's a different goal and it's a different result, and what you're getting out of it's very different.
Okay. So these groups, if I can ask you, the groups we're talking about, they're Y-DNA groups. Is that an accurate
So,
statement?
so again, like FTDNA houses various projects. So
Okay.
within that, so if you do a Y test, you don't have to join any project. You can just choose to get your results, and that will give you what it is. They'll tell you
Right.
matches are, they'll tell you, how close your matches are and things like that. So
Okay.
you don't have to join any specific family grouping if you don't want to.
Hmm.
But the bonus of that one is that they do house these projects, and a lot of surnames, I shouldn't say most, but a lot of surnames have an individual project, or in our case, multiple projects that you could join that are accurate. Uh,
Okay.
so within what I have with my results, I'm part of McPherson, I'm part of Hatton, I'm also part of broad haplogrouping projects that are very much broader than that again.
Of course.
So, and you can join them all. And again, once you've done your test, it's not like they charge or anything like that. There's no disadvantage of doing so. So yeah, that's something else that's a bonus of Y testing specifically
Yes.
on FTDNA. You'll see if you ever look at it, there's also levels. We get a lot of questions as admins about kind of what level they should go for.
Okay.
So
Yep.
even within a Y test, there's a Y37, there's a Y111,
Yep.
and then there's a big Y. So each level of tests, the more you spend and the higher the number, the more defined you're getting.
Hmm.
But um, there are many cases where I say start low if you don't know where it might end up. So, there's people who think they know what their family tree is, starting low and confirming that, and then moving forward if you want to.
Right.
There's upgrade options where there's not much difference in the cost, and at least at the lower level, if you turn out and you have nobody, which I mean, some people test and there's not a lot of hits to their results.
Right.
Know that throwing, a whole bunch of money behind a big Y, likely not very useful at that juncture.
Okay.
It's interesting for someone like me, but if you're really trying to kind of define your family history and connect it to your family tree, you're likely not going to get a whole lot more out of it because you just don't have any hits on the database.
I
So,
see. So if there's not much at that low level, you're really not going to amplify anything. You can't amplify zero.
yeah, well, exactly. So, yeah,
Okay.
I mean,
Yeah.
any of these tests really is only as good as the people testing. So, the bigger the group, the better the hits, right? I mean, you've got a lot more to compare to and a lot more matching that might go on. So,
Right.
everyone has to be the first one, or someone has to be the first one, rather. So,
Right.
it's always worth looking at that low level, or I mean, you can go bigger. There's nothing wrong with it. If that's kind of where you're at financially and that makes sense to you. And I mean,
Yep.
some people that is the case. They just go for the top thing and be done with it and see what comes of it. So, I've seen both scenarios play themselves out. But,
Yeah.
I think really there's a lot of cases where we think we know something and we may or may not. So there's been a
Hmm.
lot of cases where everyone's pretty sure that, say, in McPherson, that they all relate to the Badenoch line, the central core clan chief line. Everyone thinks that they're of that line. That's not necessarily true. Some people get interesting surprises when they do the test. There's a lot of reasons why you might have a surname, and it's
Okay.
only sometimes DNA. It's only sometimes your biological roots. There's been situations where, it's only one ancestor somewhere along the line that has inherited a mom's surname. That's going to throw it because then your Y line's not going to be that. It's going to be something else.
Okay.
So they're pretty sure that, they're this surname and then they test and then it turns out that they don't have those matches. It doesn't mean you're any less that surname.
Right.
Again, like it's the test is only testing your Y line. So, some people are disappointed by that sometimes, but they
Right.
shouldn't be. In fact, it really makes for more of a mystery for you to research because again, that could be. I mean, there's obviously adoptions along the way and parents of individuals who aren't expected. And there's
Right. Yep.
lots of
Yep.
reasons why, or just simply like, historical context, family adopting a surname due to allegiance to a clan, just not
Right.
necessarily being that clan
Sure.
or like the McGregors, who a lot of them changed their name when
Right.
they weren't permitted to use their own. So, I mean, there's a lot of reasons why you might be what you are. And sometimes it's not the obvious one when you're doing those tests.
Right.
So but it's always worthwhile. It's always worth trying to figure out what what it really looks like. And again, I encourage anyone who does it and feels disappointed by those results that they shouldn't. They again, you've discovered a family story that you don't yet know, and it's worth trying to go back and trying to figure it out. And some people can, and some people can't, but
Right.
it's certainly worthwhile regardless.
And that really illustrates how, I mean, it's all built on comparison, right, Bruce? You don't want to, folks, you don't want to do the test and then put it up on the mantelpiece. It needs to get in the group with other people, and you help them out as much as they help you to,
Yeah,
you know.
yeah, and like the volunteer admins are all really good as far as just, I mean, again, we're all volunteers. This isn't our job. This isn't,
Yeah.
our primary employment. So or employment period. We're just doing it for the sake of doing it. But everyone is usually very open to reaching out and being open to questions or concerns or seeing the results and trying to understand what they're seeing. A lot with the Y-DNA, when you get your results, it looks like a series of numbers. It looks like gibberish because
Yeah.
these are numbers that, again, for an advanced person who has an advanced degree, that they would understand all these markers and exactly what those numbers are. For me as an admin, the more matches to the numbers, the more likely that person is matched in that tree. So
Okay.
I can use those numbers just to group you, but those numbers like the specific 12 or 13 or 29 or 39 that might be on this marker or that marker
Yep.
mean pretty much as little to me as likely to anyone else, without more of a background in genetics. But I can use it to say, okay, I mean, overall, these matches appear that a lot of your DNA coding is similar to this other person. So the
Okay.
chance of being in that tree, pretty good.
I get you.
Um, and
Right.
again, as you go up the testing level, you're going to see more definition. So that big Y gives you what's called a terminal SMP, which is again just kind of a fancy way of saying like that's your. I always say, like in layman's terms, that's your twig on the branch of the tree. So,
Okay.
if you're doing a 37, a Y37 test, you're going to get a trunk. You're likely to get a limb. You'll likely get kind of a good idea that, okay, I'm over here on the tree and this person's over here, so we're likely somewhere in the same branch.
Okay.
And then as you start testing more and more, or you start upgrading those tests, you're going to see, well, I'm actually on this twig of that
Yep.
branch.
I get you.
That
Okay.
person is on that twig of that branch.
Sure.
Pretty similar. We're in the same ballpark, but like I'm
Right.
on this twig and you're on that twig. So it's not like somewhere along the line, it can be very defined, like within the last 100 years where that branch has come off, but
Sure.
somewhere along the line, the tree is split. But that's
Okay.
again kind of that power of being able to say, okay, I mean, some of the
Right.
folks that are in my grouping, for instance, I don't have a shared relative to until about the late 1600s.
Sure.
But I can say for 100% accuracy, they're on that branch with me because we share that terminal SMP. So
Okay. Eh,
it's fascinating work, and that kind of, I guess, kind of gives an idea of what's out there and
right.
some of those terms of reference and what the advantages of testing are and
Yep.
why maybe you should think about it.
Yes, that was a great illustration of saying you're going up, like saying one of, I think you said 37 is a certain, up at one major branch, maybe a smaller one off that. That's a good illustration in my mind because a lot of these things are a little bit foggy to me. I did do a test and such, but you're clearing up a lot for me. I appreciate that. And also I've seen on your, the charts and things that are used. Also adding to this is people's would be their, like you say, their common ancestors. Some of their known knowledge is put into this group as well, not just the test, right? They're saying, "Oh, I'm from the south of wherever. Where are you from?" They're talking to each other and comparing that data as
Oh
well.
yeah. So once you get a test done, you're
Yeah,
gonna have matches. And again, reaching out to those matches, you see
yeah,
their email address, you put in your email address. So I mean, by and large, you can reach out to these folks and then
yeah,
they'll respond and you can compare notes as well as building, obviously a family tree within the system so that at least, anyone can click on it and see kind of where you might land.
yeah,
Um, Again, sometimes it's obvious and sometimes it's not obvious, where it's back for far enough that you're not quite sure. And then at least you kind of know these people are my relatives and we can work together potentially to try and find our link. And again, some people are successful and some people it's just a big mystery that you just keep working on. But that's definitely something that I would always encourage whenever you get your results in is reach out to these folks and try and connect the dots. And as I say, sometimes you're able to, and sometimes you're not. But you
Right.
know your cousins.
Yeah, this is great. So I think we're going to have another talk or two and get into this a little bit more in depth, a little more Hatton or McPherson centric perhaps, and talk about some of the results that have been found, maybe what some of the people have in common. I'm sure there's some outliers like myself. You said I was one, of course. I've always been an outlier. I'm not surprised. It's my wildcat blood, I think. But
Sounds good.
at midnight things happen, but that's neither here nor there. Um, but I think we can go a little further. And this has been great to get a broad foundation in this whole who should test, what kind of tests are out there. GEDmatch is a clearinghouse to get to where you are, right? To get a test from anywhere to FTD would be GEDmatch would be one.
Yep, that's another one out there.
Okay. They don't test, but
No,
am I right? They're
but
sort
you
of a
can
vehicle
incorporate.
between
You
things.
can
Is that
incorporate your test again, like if you do an ancestry, you can bring. It's another one that you can incorporate your results from other companies onto that site. Yeah,
it's sort of a middleman in a way between things. I think of it like that.
can be.
You download a
Yeah.
huge file onto your computer, folks, is what I did. And you're told not to open it because it's like several pounds, and then you have to ship it off again, uh, and it gets compared with everyone's. And you'll find people saying, "What's your GetMatch number?" all over Facebook. If you didn't know what they're talking about, this is it. So this is what we're trying to bring out in the open here with Bruce. And thank you so much for being with us.
Not a problem.
And you and I will talk soon, and we'll set up another date and go in a little further in depth. That sound good?
Sounds good.
All right. Thank you so much for coming on.
Not a problem.
All right. Touch not the cat, but a glove.
To you too.
Thank you, sir. Goodbye, everyone.